The Tragic Flaw is the Truth by Cats and Cookies 66. Peter's spidey senses gave him a weird feeling all day. The hair on his arms stood on end throughout his entire bus ride to school, and his stomach felt like it was sinking as he walked through the crowded hallways in between periods. Ned glanced over at Peter's slightly discomfited face, his eyes glued to their chemistry teacher and his eyebrows knitted together. The class was almost over, but Ned wanted to know what was on the other's mind. "Hey, you doing okay, Peter?" Ned whispered, leaning in to nudge Peter's side. Peter's trance broke, and he glanced over at his friend. "I don't know. I've had this weird feeling all day," Peter murmured a short reply, turning his attention back to the teacher. Ned leaned away from Peter and turned his attention back to the teacher as well. Before too long, the lunch bell rang and everyone picked up the homework sheet they'd received for the day. As Peter slung his backpack over his shoulder, he felt like someone was staring at him. He followed his spidey senses to meet the gaze of Flash, who smirked at Peter as he left the classroom. Whatever, Peter thought to himself, trying to brush it off, even though his heartbeat picked up at a faster pace with anxiety. Ned and Peter made their way out of the chemistry classroom into the lunchroom, where they met up with MJ and sat at their usual table, playfully teasing each other. Having Peter's friends with him helped calm his nerves, until Flash stood up from his own table and called from across the lunchroom. "Yo, Parker! How's the fake Stark internship going?" Peter rolled his eyes and sighed dramatically in response. Does he ever know when to quit? He's getting old, MJ joked amongst the small group. Peter and Ned laughed at her comment. Peter stood up from his seat and called back to Flash. "It's going great, thanks," he remarked, sitting back down and smirking. MJ breathed out a laugh. The three were planning on just ignoring Flash after that, but the boy walked arrogantly towards the trio, his chin tilted upward with fake superiority. "You know, Peter, it's sad that you have to lie about things like that because you aren't privileged. You just want the attention because everything about you is so sad." Flash smirked. Peter cocked an eyebrow. Ned and MJ glared at the boy standing in front of Peter. "Are you saying my life is sad just because I'm not as privileged as you? At least I got people that genuinely care about me," Peter remarked sarcastically. "Really?" Flash scoffed. "Last time I checked, they were all dead." A shiver ran through Peter's body. His snarky smile was wiped away in an instant and replaced with an anxious expression. "See? Sad life. It's funny that every family member you come into contact with ends up dead," Flash interjected, crossing his arms in eminence. Peter averted his eyes from the bully with slight irritation. "Flash, that's low, even for you." MJ glared at Flash. Ned's face showed all anger. "Well, it's true. His aunt is practically on her deathbed already," Flash joked. Peter quickly stood up from his seat. "Flash, that's enough," he rebutted. "Oh no, I'm so scared," Flash cried sarcastically, backing up dramatically as Peter took a step closer to the bully. "What, Peter? It's clear you're just walking bad luck for your family," remarked Flash, as Peter moved slowly to stand in front of the bully. Flash's smirk only growing because he was finally getting a reaction out of Peter. They started to gain stares and attention from fellow students in the classroom. Tension filled the school cafeteria. "Peter, sit back down. Come on, man," Ned pleaded, not wanting things to escalate, although his words were ignored as Peter's face hardened slightly with growing irritation. His fists clenched, trying to hold back. "It's only a matter of time till everyone else dies because of you, Parker." "Shut up, Eugene," Peter huffed, anger bubbling in his stomach. Everyone's attention was on them now. "Maybe it would be better if you disappeared, Parker. That way you wouldn't have any more blood on your hands." That was the last straw. Peter shoved Flash, causing the bully to stumble. "Come on, Parker. Hit me, I dare you." Flash chuckled, catching his balance and shoving Peter back, which felt like a little nudge. Peter swung at Flash, blinded by an unfamiliar rage, hitting the bully square in the nose and shoving him to the ground. Blood dripped from Flash's nose. It was definitely broken from Peter's inhuman strength. Bystanders gasped, and many pulled out their phones to record. A crowd was forming around them. Flash quickly stood back up and charged at Peter with full force, which was just enough to knock him to the ground. He quickly restrained one of Peter's wrists to the linoleum floor of the cafeteria, and punched Peter's face with his free hand. Peter twisted out of Flash's grip, and jabbed the boy on top of him in the stomach. Flashes from phone cameras flickered around the circle, and loud chatter filled the cafeteria. Ed and MJ stood, watching with shock, as the pair punched and kicked and shoved each other on the ground. There were small drops of Peter's and Flash's blood on the floor. The sight made some kids squeamish, but they just couldn't break their stares. This was not like Peter at all. After a few more punches, 3 teachers pushed through the crowd. One pulled Flash from Peter, and another grabbed Peter and forced him to his feet. The 2 attempted to lunge back at each other, Flash unsuccessful. Peter's superhuman strength made it easy to get out of the teacher's grasp. But before Peter could get to Flash, he was pulled away again. The 3rd teacher shooed everyone away as the 2 other teachers escorted Peter and Flash to the office, getting stares from everyone as they walked. Peter held a bag of ice to where a black eye was forming, while Flash held a tissue to his bleeding, broken nose. He stared off into space, not daring to glance over at Flash, who sat 2 chairs away from him. He just got into a fight, and Peter was the one who started it. Shame burned in his chest. Usually he was so good at not letting things bother him, especially when it came to Flash. He was supposed to be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. This isn't what Spider-Man does. This is the complete opposite of what Spider-Man does, especially to his biggest admirer. Principal Moroder walked out of his office and over to the miserable, bleeding and bruised boys. "I've contacted both your guardians to come to the school for a little discussion about what happened. Peter." Peter looked away from the ground and up at the principal. "Your aunt didn't pick up, so I called your 2nd emergency contact." Peter's lips pressed into a thin line, and he nodded hesitantly. "Makes sense. She's at work." "They'll be here in a moment. Until then, you 2 wait here," Principal Moroder said, before he walked back into his office. The 2 boys stayed silent and stared at the floor. "Wait, 2nd emergency contact? But that's... oh, no." Peter's eyes widened at the remembrance of who exactly his 2nd emergency contact was. Mr. Stark. And he's coming to the school. And he knows Peter got into a fight. Peter shook with worry, and his breathing quickened. His grip on the ice pack tightened slightly. His busted lip quivered, and his eyes watered as he shifted in his seat. What will Mr. Stark say? What is he going to do? Is he going to take away his suit? Will he not let Peter work with him in the workshop or lab anymore with him? Is he going to cut Peter out of his life completely because he, a superhero, hurt an innocent person willingly? Oh God, he can't breathe. Why is it so hard? Everything feels so loud, even his own panicked heartbeat. Tears threatened to spill from his eyes, and the tension of forcing himself to pretend like nothing was happening only made breathing harder. Powerful footsteps grew closer to the office, and soon the door flung open, revealing Tony Stark in a nice suit, along with his signature sunglasses. "Where's Peter?" Tony questioned, looking at the office lady in front of him, who didn't look up from her computer and pointed behind him. Mr. Stark turned to see Peter and Flash. Flash's jaw dropped as he got a good look at Tony's face. "Peter, what? Oh, kid," Tony spoke, kneeling in front of Peter, his face ever so slightening at the sight of his face and trembling grip on the ice pack. Peter finally let out the sob he'd been holding in when he met Tony's gaze. Hey, Tony said, in a resonant but kind tone. "It's all right, Underoos," he continued, wrapping his arms around the boy's quivering form firmly. "You gotta breathe, kid," Stark reminded, as he felt the unsteady breaths of the boy enveloped in his arms. Peter took a shaky, deep breath and exhaled. Tony rubbed comforting circles on the boy's back. "Here you go," Tony muttered, then pulled away from the hug and looked Peter in the eye, which caused his heart to clench at the sight of Peter's glossy eyes. "You're okay." Principal Morita peeked out from his office and hesitantly called out, Mr. Stark?" Tony stood and looked behind himself. The office ladies looked up from their work and finally noticed that Tony fucking Stark was here. Will you and Peter join me in my office?" Principal Morita spoke, clearing his throat to compose himself. Tony gave the man his paparazzi smile and turned his attention back to Peter, giving him a genuine smile. "Let's go, Underoos." Peter took a quick, deep breath and stood up, keeping the ice held against his eye. Tony put a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder as the two walked into Principal Morita's office. Peter looked back at Flash, who looked like he was trying to process everything. "You can take a seat," Morita offered, motioning a hand to the two chairs in front of his desk, and then sat in his office chair. Tony looked around the room judgmentally, letting out an amused huff, and then sat down next to Peter. "So, Peter." The principal shifted in his chair. "I'm sure you're well aware that we do not tolerate fighting at this school." Peter kept silent and nodded his head slowly. "And I'm just trying to understand what would provoke you to start such a thing. This isn't like you," spoke Morita. "Kid must have really pissed him off then," Tony muttered in agreement, a smirk on his face. God, this man-child can never take anything seriously. Peter hesitated before speaking up. He just said some stuff that made me angry. I overreacted." "I'm gonna pretend you didn't say that," Tony interjected. Okay, apparently the man-child can take a few things seriously when it comes to Peter. "What? It's the truth," Peter objected. "Did you not hear, Mr. Principal Man? This isn't like you, Peter," Tony stated. "Morita," the principal added. Yeah, Morita," Tony interrupted quickly. "Look, kid, you need to tell us the truth here. No excuses." "I am telling the truth. It was just his usual teasing and I overreacted," Peter dejected, looking away from Tony's eyes. "Don't make me call Pepper, because I'll call her," Tony threatened, pulling out his phone to further pressure Peter. "No, wait, don't call Pepper," Peter stammered, his eyes going wide. "Then tell us the truth," Tony said firmly. "I told you the truth," Peter lied again. "No, you didn't," Tony stated. Principal Morita sat and watched the exchange. He wanted to try and join the conversation, but the overall shock of Tony Stark speaking to this teenager as if he were his own child was enough to keep him quiet. "That's it. I'm calling Pepper," Tony snapped, immediately searching for Pepper's number on his phone. "Wait, Mr. Stark." "No. If you won't talk to me, then you'll talk to Pepper. God knows she'll get you to spit out every last detail of what happened, Tony stated, holding his phone up to his ear as the phone dialed. Oh, you don't really have to call Miss Potts, sir, Principal Morita spoke, but was unnoticed by the pair in front of him. Mr. Stark, please don't. You really... Peter pleaded, until Pepper answered the phone. He went silent, but kept a frustrated glare aimed at Tony. What's up, Tony? Need something? Pepper's kind voice sounded on the phone. Yeah. Tony trailed off. I'm with Peter at his school right now. He got into a fight. Oh my God, is he okay? Pepper said, concern filling her tone. He's fine, but I think you're gonna have to come down here, Tony spoke, giving a quick glare at Peter's attempt to look angry. What for? What's going on? He won't tell us what happened, so I was thinking you could work your woman magic to make him tell us, Tony stated. Jesus, you're a child. Pepper laughed. I'll get there as fast as I can, she chimed. Thanks, Pep. Tony smiled. Love you, Tony, Pepper beamed. Love you too, Tony added before hanging up. He cleared his throat and shifted in his seat. You guys are gross, Peter muttered, sinking into his chair with a dramatic pout on his busted lip. Well, I guess while we wait for Miss Potts, I'll talk to Eugene. Principal Morita spoke awkwardly, standing up from his desk chair. You both can take a seat in the front office until then. Tony stood up from his seat. Come on, Underoos. Peter shot the man a glare and stood up. The two made their way out of the principal's office, with Morita following closely behind. Flash and his father sat silently next to each other. His father's expression was a mix between angry and annoyed, while Flash's was more nervous. When Peter and Tony went to sit next to the pair, Flash and his father's eyes widened at the sight of the billionaire. Eugene and Mr. Thompson, will you meet me in my office? Principal Morita called out. And with a groan, Flash's father stood up, and Flash followed shortly behind. Flash glanced back at Peter for a second, before he disappeared into the principal's office. Ignoring the stares from everyone else in the front office, Tony cleared his throat, and the pair sat in silence. Peter stared off into space as Tony picked at his nails, clearly lost in anxious thought. After a while, the sound of heels clicking against the school's linoleum floor got closer, and the door to the office opened. Pepper stepped into the office, glancing around to look for the two men. A dumbfounded office lady pointed behind Pepper. She turned around and let out a small sigh. Tony stood up from the chair he was sitting in and stepped over to her, giving her a quick peck on the cheek. After the interaction, their gazes shifted to Peter. Pepper frowned as Peter met her eyes. Come here, Peter. Pepper spoke softly, giving the boy a warm smile. Peter anxiously stood up and walked over to the couple, Pepper enveloping him in a comforting hug. Peter really tried his best not to cry as Pepper ran her hands through his hair and pressed a gentle kiss on his forehead. A moment later, the two pulled away. Pepper raised a hand to move the ice pack Peter held against his eye, wincing at the sight of his black eye. You okay, hon? Pepper questioned, inspecting it. I'm okay. Super healing, Peter mumbled, giving Pepper a small smile. Flash and his father made their way out of Principal Morita's office and past the trio. Flash's father gave them a glare, and Flash gave him an anxious look. As Flash was about to leave the office behind his father, he glanced back at Peter and mouthed, I'm sorry, as he left. Peter was about to say something, but Morita called out to the three. Peter, Mr. Stark, Miss Potts, come join me in my office. The trio exchanged looks, then made their way over to Principal Morita's office. "Take a seat. I apologize, there are only 2 chairs." The principal pardoned, sitting down at his office chair. "That's fine. Pepper, you sit," Tony insisted, standing off to one side. Peter and Pepper both sat next to each other. "Well, Eugene told me a bit about what happened when we spoke. He did admit to teasing you and egging you on," Principal Morita spoke, shifting in his chair a bit. "But that doesn't make your actions any more excusable." "I know," Peter muttered. "Did the other boy tell you what he was teasing Peter about?" Pepper questioned, leaning a bit forward in her seat. "No, he didn't," the principal responded. "Peter, what did that boy say to you?" Pepper wondered. Peter contemplated telling the truth. He didn't want Tony and Pepper to know what Flash had said. Flash had basically told him to kill himself. And even if Peter didn't like Flash and Flash hated Peter's guts, he didn't want Pepper to worry. And he didn't want Tony to ruin the boy's life. Because he can and will. God. Having both Pepper and Tony there made it so much harder to be stubborn. "Peter, I just want you to know this is a safe environment to tell the truth," the principal added. Peter almost scoffed at the man's words. He just said I have a sad life and that I'm lying about my internship," Peter mumbled. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth. "There's more to it than that, kid, I know it," Tony spoke. Peter sighed quietly. Well, he may have said I should have disappeared and I'm the reason everyone in my family is dying, but it's fine, really. Pepper and Tony gaped. No. No, it's not," Tony argued. "I told you it was fine. It's just dumb teasing," Peter mumbled, shifting deeper into his chair. "Peter, if this teasing was enough to make you, of all people, throw a punch at someone, then it's not fine," Pepper stated firmly. "Tony, get back here. Stay put. Don't threaten the poor kid," Pepper ordered, upon noticing Tony trying to leave the room, most likely to end Flash's whole life. Tony quietly walked back to his spot behind Pepper and Peter. Peter stayed quiet, staring at the floor beneath him. "Parker, bullying is a very serious issue, and I'll make sure Thompson receives an appropriate punishment," Principal Morita said. "However, so are fights, regardless if it was fueled by bullying. You still initiated the fight, so I have no choice but to suspend you for a week," the man continued. 1 week, Peter muttered. God, Aunt May was going to be pissed. 1 week, Morita repeated. Peter let his tense shoulders fall, and he took a deep breath. It's fine. I deserve it anyway. I shouldn't have beat him up." "Well, I'm glad you know it was wrong. You're free to go," the principal said, while standing up from his desk chair. Morita held out a hand to Tony and Pepper. Tony shook his hand. "Nice to meet you both. It's an honor." Tony gave the man a fake smile, mentally cringing at the words, "It's an honor." He turned his attention to Peter and Pepper. "Let's get going, kid." Peter nodded in response, and the 3 of them left the principal's office. As the trio made their way out of the building and to the cars? Tony slung an arm around Peter's shoulder. "I'm sorry," Peter said anxiously, as Tony held him close. "Hey, don't ever apologize for standing up for yourself," Tony smirked. "You're not mad?" Peter questioned, looking up at Tony's smug face with furrowed eyebrows. "Oh no, I'm mad. But that kid has been bothering you for a while. He deserved it," Tony remarked. "Oh my God, Tony," Pepper muttered. "Let's go get lunch. That was a nightmare," Tony chimed.